Your Excellency, Undersecretary of Public Education of the United Mexican States, Your Excellencies, Ministers of Education, Honorable Senior Representatives of Ministries of Education, international and civil society organizations, and academic bodies, ladies and gentlemen. Over the past few days, I have sat at my desk, pen in hand, seeking to summon the words required, the words worthy of an assembly such as this one, of women and men, of the nobility and the convictions, inciting them to travel from across the world to answer a call to action. But I did not, ladies and gentlemen, find those words. For as president of the Education Relief Foundation, I have made numerous speeches in the past about the organization, its missions, its activities. And as speech succeeded speech, they have gradually, sentence by sentence, and then in a sudden swoop, standardized themselves. And there will be those amongst you, I am certain, who will know that in every single speech, I repeat the very same quote by Albert Camus. Every generation probably feels called upon to remake the world, he said. Mine, however, knows that it will not remake it, but its task is perhaps greater still, for it consists in preventing that the world unmakes itself. And I am shameless, ladies and gentlemen. I am shameless in this repetition, because since my last speech, since Albert Camus first uttered those words over 60 years ago, our task is greater still, twice as urgent, multiple times as complex, to ensure that the world does not unmake itself, while simultaneously remaking it. To that end, we must have the courage, the fortitude, the intransigent determination to emancipate ourselves from platitudinous, stale concepts, to emancipate ourselves from the immovable present in which we act, to project ourselves in the future. And we are certainly not to wait for this future, ladies and gentlemen. For the future is not an inevitable, abstract promise. No, the future is the result of the struggle of women and men, of unyielding convictions. It is, ladies and gentlemen, this future for which we must collectively aspire. The future, the struggle of a humanity which knows the truth of Caballero's words. The doctrine of sacrifice is the mother of the little that we are. The future, ladies and gentlemen, is a provocation, a challenge to each one of us, individually and collectively, to sacrifice the false comfort of the certain status quo and embrace what could be because it should be, if we only dare make it possible. And I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that it is not fleeting inspiration through second-rate sophistry that ERF is seeking to purchase. Our societies, as we all know, are no longer sustainable. Our social contracts are fracturing. Our societal fabrics are unfurling. And our environmental equilibria are further destabilizing. Humanity, now more so than ever, and for better or for worse, shares a common, collective, inextricable destiny on what has become, let us not shy from saying, a planetary Titanic. But ours, ladies and gentlemen, ours is not a caravan of despair. Ours is to ensure that our planetary Titanic continues on its potent journey. Ours is to unmake the systems which have led the world to the brink of unmaking itself. Ours is to finally give long overdue birth to humanity. And if we are, as we ought to do so, it is not because we are, perhaps, wiser or more virtuous than previous generations, but because we are reaching a point in which we have no other choice. Because we are aware, in the words of Al-Ghazali, that al-ilmu bila amalin junoon, that knowledge without action is insanity. And we refuse ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, on this planetary Titanic, the insanity of disregarding a seepage of water simply because of the treacherous sense of security that the seepage is only affecting the other side of the vessel. We are, therefore, seeking to prevent the world from unmaking itself by remaking it. But there is, ladies and gentlemen, no remaking without overhauling our education systems. For education is, we shy not from saying, the most political, in the noblest sense of the term, of issues in any society. For it is paradoxically both the intended sculptor of our future societies, while simultaneously being their exact reflection in the present. We must, accordingly, identify bluntly and profoundly critique the power dynamics which have existed and persist in education before we are capable of reimagining it, lest we reintroduce those dynamics in a new form in the education of the future. Lest our initiatives, laudable as they may be nothing more than vain attempts to evacuate smoke from a burning house without seeking to extinguish the all-consuming fire. But this task, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be achieved by any one government, any one initiative, any one policy, any one organization, nor indeed any one generation. It must be a cooperative, collective, sustained and sustainable effort. But to that end, we must be capable of articulating a common language. And stop, halt, believing that mere monologues crossing each other are dialogue. We must, therefore, have the courage to resist, once again, the litigious concepts, the stale concepts, simply because they are en vogue. We must collectively step beyond the idea of inclusivity as mere access to an education. We must understand inclusive education as an inextricable triumvirate, an indissoluble combination of access to an education, holistic, humanistic, and progressive social policies, and perpetual novelty in curricula, content, and pedagogy. Access, because there is no inclusion where there is no protection of the right, nor the means to access an education. Holistic, humanistic, and progressive social policies, because education and policies in education do not exist in a vacuum, and without a socio-political environment enshrining the human and the process of learning at the center of its social contract. It is vain to aspire for an education which benefits more than the privileged few. Perpetual novelty in curricula, content, and pedagogy. Because an education system that is severed from the people it pretends to educate, oblivious of national priorities, and contemptuous of local aspirations and realities, is no longer education, but rather undeniable alienation. Balanced and inclusive education, ladies and gentlemen, through its pillar of contextuality, can be best summarized in the words of Paulo Freire. One cannot expect positive results from an educational or political action program which fails to respect the particular view of the world held by the people. Such a program constitutes cultural invasion. Good intentions, ladies and gentlemen, notwithstanding. For balanced and inclusive education cannot be balanced and inclusive if it does not overhaul the imperial, industrial, centralized model of education. The adoption of balanced and inclusive education in its multiple forms must, accordingly, be accompanied by a framework in which the narrative of empowerment, that is, the global north helping the global south help itself by merely channeling aid, is recognized as neither sufficient nor adequate, but rather as detrimental and socially ruinous. In Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire explains that it does happen that the heirs of exploitation, which does include the privileged in countries of the global south, move to the side of the exploited. Yet we almost always bring with us, ladies and gentlemen, the marks of our origin, our prejudices, our defamations, which include a lack of confidence in the people's ability to want, to think, and to know. Accordingly, these adherents, namely us, to the people's cause, run constantly the risk of falling into a generosity as malefic as the generosity of the oppressors. For the generosity of the oppressors is nourished by an unjust order, which must exist to justify that generosity. And whilst we, converts, on the other hand, truly desire to transform the unjust order because of our background, we believe that we must be the executors of the transformation. We talk about the people, ladies and gentlemen, but we do not trust them. And trusting the people is the condition for revolutionary change. A real humanist can be identified more by his trust in the people, which engages him in their struggle, than by 1,000 actions in their favor, but without that trust. It is quintessential, therefore, for the tools of self-empowerment to overcome marginalization, to rise from within the marginalized, whilst ours, ladies and gentlemen, is the task of ensuring that we dismantle the walls hindering the marginalized from fulfilling themselves. Walls of which we are undeniably the unconscious beneficiaries. For it is not, ladies and gentlemen, generous, virtuous, moral of us to do so. It is merely just. But to venture means to unequivocally accept our historic duty and responsibility. The journey is still long, and arduous is the road, and historic as they may be. This forum, the Global Guide and the International Call for Balanced and Inclusive Education, are wholly insufficient. On this planetary Titanic, ladies and gentlemen, our greatest enemy is time. And we can no longer afford to procrastinate. That is, of course, not to say that we ought not take the time to reflect. The Education Relief Foundation has, I am not remorseful to say, ideas and concepts at the core of its activities. And balanced and inclusive education, by its very essence, requires perpetual reflection, imagination, thinking, and rethinking. But we cannot run the risk, in doing so, of becoming armchair revolutionaries. The clock is ticking, ladies and gentlemen, and history is our merciless judge. This is, ladies and gentlemen, the reason that we are assembled here today. This is, ladies and gentlemen, the reason that I could not find the words to express my awe in addressing an assembly of women and men who have traveled from 5 continents, because they are resolute in neither indulging in self-gratifying pity nor impotent compassion, but true solidarity, condition sine qua non for our collective survival, with the intransigent determination that the powerful play of humanity goes on, and that we may collectively contribute a verse. In fact, let this be known, ladies and gentlemen, as the first quincontinental, not because we are pretentious, but because we are indeed sincere. Thank you very much.